Again, now South Africa's job crisis getting worse by the quarter. And as if that was not bad enough, our youth seem to be struggling with financing the cost of going for interviews and choosing between buying food and job seeking. That's worrying. Youth Capital has partnered with the Research Hub Open Dialogue to carry out research recently to understand the impact of lockdown on young people's ability to look for work. Let's talk about some of the findings now with Kristal Duncan-Williams, the project lead from Youth Capital. Kristal, good afternoon. Welcome to today. Thank you very much for your time. When was your research done?
So we conducted the research towards the end of last year, between August and November, and we really wanted to understand the impact that COVID had had on the way in which young people were looking for work and the costs associated with that activity.
And your sample size?
We had just over 2,000 respondents. It was all online, so we acknowledge that that would have excluded some young people who don't have access to online platforms. But we really wanted to get a quick response, and obviously online platforms are just easier for that. So we had over 2,000 respondents.
Yeah. So what kind of questions were you asking the young people?
So we asked them, a series of multiple choice questions, did you spend between 0 and 250, 250 and 500, etc. on data costs, on transport costs, and on application fees. We also asked young people if they had to borrow money to look for work and who they borrowed that money from, if they relied on grants, and also if they were making use of online platforms, zero-rated platforms or WhatsApp chatbots, which some employers are beginning to use for recruitment purposes, because we really wanted to understand in the context of COVID how online platforms were being used and whether they were reducing the costs of job seeking for young people.
A few years ago, I was involved in research into youth unemployment. And one of the things that came up even then, a few years ago, was the cost of trying to find a job as a young person. Even then, some of them you have to catch a taxi from your township, and sometimes not one taxi, a couple of taxis. You have to put a CV together, and for you to go to one of those days internet cafes and get it printed, and all those kind of costs. It was still expensive. So what did you find now?
So the last study that was conducted, which was very extensive, was the Siaka Youth Assets Employability Study, and that's from 2019. And they found between an average of between 500 and over 900 Rand. It was obviously very varied. As you say, depending on your distance from the job, the cost of transport obviously can vary greatly. And what we found is that, our respondents said similar things, and this is, 2 years later. For data alone, majority of people said they could spend up to 500 Rand a month. For transport alone, people said they could spend up to 500 Rand a month on these things. And as you say, it's a complex issue. It's employers want, as the government jobs want, certified copies of things. That requires a taxi fare to a police station. It requires printing costs. So all of these costs, which might seem insignificant to you and I who have a job, can be a huge barrier for young people, where they're literally having to choose between a meal that day or looking for work.
How are the young people then of today, in terms of your research, navigating all these difficulties? I mean, spending just under 1,000 Rand or about 1,000 Rand for you just to try and get a job is a difficult set of circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, the one open-ended question we asked young people was how COVID has impacted how they look for work. And, the obvious things, which I think we all understand, that businesses closed, people were retrenched, there were less jobs. I think these are things we would expect. But maybe things that people would not expect is young people saying, well, I used to borrow money from so-and-so, but they then lost their job, or they had a reduced income in that time, and so they could no longer give me money to look for work. Or, I was borrowing money from a family member in order to stay in the city, which is closer to work opportunities. But during COVID, I then had to move back home, which then, put even greater distance between myself and those job opportunities. And so I think these are some of the ways in which young people are, change the way they were looking for work that we might not realize. Often young people are just going door to door and handing out copies of their CVs. And obviously they couldn't do that during lockdown. And so, that's why we were interested in understanding these online platforms. And what we find is that young people, a lot of them aren't even aware of these online platforms. And secondly, that navigating these online platforms is not straightforward for a young person trying to do it from, a basic smartphone with poor internet connection, load shedding, which, makes the connections even poorer during load shedding times. And so what we're really saying is that, understanding the cost of job seeking is one piece of the puzzle, but it's actually a lot more complex than that for the young person.
And I'm just listening to you, I'm thinking there must be a lot of disillusioned young people, and some of them might even be tempted, so to speak, to give up in trying to get a job. And as you've said earlier, the cost of data as well comes into it because these are online platforms. So what are the key takeouts in terms of this new world of a young person trying to use online platforms to find a job?
So I think, we highlight this in the report, and people can tune into the report launch tomorrow to hear, where we unpack it in detail. But just, at a high level, we had zero-rated platforms during a state of emergency for education websites. So we've trialed this, the zero-rated approach to things, which means that there's no cost to the young person to access the site. That it has some tweaks that are needed, but we know that, it can be done. And then making use, as I said, of things like WhatsApp. All young people are on WhatsApp. WhatsApp data bundles are by far one of the most affordable options in terms of data purchases for young people. And so I think employers need to start thinking differently about how they look for young people and how they allow young people to access the work opportunities they have, whether that is through, absorbing the cost of an online application portal so that the young person doesn't, carry that cost, or using things like WhatsApp, which young people are familiar with and carries a low requirement in terms of, smartphone capabilities and in terms of data.
Yeah, firstly, thank you for sharing some of the high-level stuff before you even launch your report tomorrow. I appreciate your time this afternoon here on Today on eNCA. Kristal, yeah, it's interesting that digitalization supposed to enable a lot of things, but it's still costing. So there is a digital cost as well to young people looking for work. Finally, before I let you go, Kristal, your plan tomorrow is to launch. And are you also hoping that out of the Youth Capital's survey now of how young people in today's post-COVID world are sort of looking for work and how they are engaging with the digital platforms? Because your proposal of a zero-rated kind of website or online application makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, what my message is personally, as youth capitalists, to say there are big interventions. So you have SAYouth.mobi. It's a big zero-rated platform that the government's put out. Employers should be using that platform. And then to employers to say, to understand how much of a barrier these work-seeking costs could be, and to offer, vouchers for young people, for data, for transport, so that young people can actually come and attend interviews. And also to not ask for millions of things to be certified right at the start of the interview process, where the young person maybe stands a slim chance of ever actually getting the job. So to just employees to think about how to hire differently, and then obviously calls on government around zero-rating all job seeking websites, making public employment opportunities count for young people, making youth centers work so that young people have access to computers in their communities that they can use to look for work.
Cut down on that red tape. I like that as well. Thank you very much. Kristal Duncan-Williams, the project lead from Youth Capital. You'll hear more about what they found in their interesting survey over the period of COVID-19, asking plus minus 2,000 young South Africans how have they been coping during lockdown and using digital platforms, of course, in trying to find jobs. Because it costs a young person on average in South Africa about 938 rand a month just to get a job between getting the data, between transport costs and so on. And the choice sometimes is difficult. Do you do that or you save money for food? Very, very tough situation to be at. So let's look forward to what Youth Capital will really unpack tomorrow when they launch their survey's findings in full.